Recently, Venerable Chodron gave a talk that was very aptly called How Not to Relate to Your Spiritual Mentor. And so I thought to follow along with that, but looking at it from the side of what to do. And this was sparked by a beautiful teaching that Dzong Rinpoche gave a couple of years ago in Singapore that I watched online during COVID when we're all resting. And it was on Ashvaghosha's text, 50 verses of how to relate to the Guru or something like that. And towards the end of the second teaching, one of the students very boldly asked, Rinpoche, what are your expectations of your students? And Rinpoche very humbly deflected and said, I have no students, we're just friends. And so he answered in a kind of roundabout way, where he said that all the Buddha's teachings can converge on a single point. And that is to help us free ourselves from the source of our suffering. So therefore, our spiritual teachers expect us to free ourselves from the source of our suffering. And I don't know, it was just, that really struck me as quite powerful in that moment. It's very obvious that it's the essence of the Four Truths, the Buddha's first teaching, but just to think of it, it's like, oh, my teacher expects me to free myself from the source of my suffering. Wow, I hadn't thought about it in exactly that way before. Yeah. And this relates very much to the Four Truths, the Buddha's first teachings. It relates to the topic of the Three Jewels, the topics that we'll be covering in the winter retreat coming up. So this is also alive for me in that way. And in relation to specifically, like, how does our relationship to the spiritual mentor or the spiritual mentor at all relate to the Four Truths or the Three Jewels? And, when we recite Namo Gurubhaya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dhammaya, Namo Sanghaya, it's like, why is Namo Gurubhaya there first? What does that mean? So there's so many questions that relate to this. And thinking about, is it reasonable that my teacher expects me to free myself from the source of my suffering? So how could that be reasonable? That's such a huge expectation. Well, it's like, yes, it's because they teach us how to do that. It's like so many pennies were just dropping, just thinking about this. It's like, right. The sole purpose of the teacher-student relationship in the context of Buddhism is that our teachers show us how to free ourselves from the source of our suffering. How amazingly kind. It took me back to a verse from Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life in Chapter 1, where talking about bodhicitta and that aspiration to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. And that question of who else has this thought? Do even your parents have this thought? Have the thought to free all sentient beings from all their suffering, or in relation to us? I think unless we're born in a Buddhist family, do our parents even, with their amazing love and care for us, but do they even go that far to have the idea of freeing us from the source of our suffering? In my case, no, I don't think they even have the framework to understand what that would mean. They want me to be happy, but that's no doubt about that. But in terms of helping me, showing me how to free myself from the source of my suffering, no. So again, how amazingly kind of our spiritual mentor to teach us that, and to have done the work so that they're able to do that. Because our teachers aren't just teaching us how to get rich, how to be comfortable in this life, or how to even just get a good rebirth. We are being taught how to get a good rebirth in terms of following ethical conduct and other precious human lives so that we can practice. But it goes so far beyond that in terms of total eradication of all forms of suffering, which I don't think at my level I can even really understand what that means. And so then thinking about this expectation further in terms of expecting me to free myself from the source of my suffering, yeah, it really asks me to question how I relate to the spiritual mentor. Do I view all the actions of the teacher within that framework, that whatever they are doing with their body, speech, and mind is for the purpose of helping me to free myself from the source of my suffering? Their feedback, they're pointing out my faults, they're pointing out my blind spots. That's done to help me free myself from my suffering. That's a helpful perspective to endure the discomfort of what I experience, the discomfort of having to look in the mirror and see, oh, there's my pride, there's my jealousy, there's the various ways that I act under these afflictions in very gross, misguided ways. Yeah, pointing this out is all to help me free myself from the suffering. And yeah, how much do I wake up and throughout the day have this sense of a responsibility of like, oh, today my job is to free myself from the source of my suffering? Maybe a little bit. I'm getting better at trying to dwell a little bit on the three motivations in the morning, in terms of like, today, what does it mean in my life with the people I'm around, who I will be encountering and working with? What does it mean to do no harm? And trying to chew on that a little bit more to make it tangible. And that directly relates back to freeing myself from the source of suffering, in at least in what I'm capable of now in terms of working with the afflictions. It's like I don't understand emptiness enough yet to be able to really start eradicating the afflictions from the root, but I can at least try to grossly subdue them so words aren't coming out of my mouth that I later regret. Mm-hmm. And thinking about this expectation our teachers have of us also really asks me to think about, like, how much do I really believe I can be free from my suffering? Do I understand what that means? What does that look like? Do I understand the goal that I'm even striving for in terms of full awakening or nirvana? What does true cessations really mean? Do I understand the causal three jewels and the resultant three jewels in terms of, yeah, the three jewels that are our inspiration and our guide, that give us the teachings, but that I'm trying to actually become the three refuges? So there's so much there that I don't know or understand yet. That's the beauty of what we're going to be diving into this winter. That can really add a lot of fuel to the fire for our practice when we really understand what our own potential is, by understanding really what the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are, and that we can become that. And then to investigate, like, what evidence do I have right now about my own potential? That true cessation is possible. And I think that evidence that we have right now will be very unique for all of us. But I think maybe a common one is just that, we've all had experience of applying antidotes to the afflictions and knowing that in some way they work. And then going back to that quote from, that Geshe Tapke often repeats to us from the Pramanavartika, and that the afflictions are not in the nature of the mind. No, the mind is clear light. The defilements are adventitious. In that the defilements or the afflictions are not in the nature of the mind. They are not who we are, and they can be eradicated. And being practitioners of the Mahayana vehicle, I would say that the expectation of our teachers is not just that we free ourselves from the source of our suffering, but that in the process of doing that, and the end goal of doing that, is so we can help others do exactly the same. And yeah, this is, for me, our 73-year-old abbess going on a 2-month world tour. It's like, why is she doing that? And it brought me back to what Venerable Monlam in the motivation a couple of months ago, about that last line that we recite in Pasada, where, liberating sentient beings is the utmost happiness. It's like, that's the motivation for why our teacher is going on this big world tour, that, the many hours in the airport and on these uncomfortable planes, and, it's not all fun and games, but this wish to be of benefit, to go out and teach, to teach others how to free themselves from their suffering. Yeah. And in the Vajrakata Sutra teachings we've been receiving from Geshe Tapki as well, just at the start of the sutra, Subhuti is praising the Buddha for the great entrustment he has given to the bodhisattvas there. And that's outline number 1, which is not cutting the continuity of the Buddha's lineage, where that entrustment to the bodhisattvas is these beautiful teachings on conventional ultimate bodhicitta, that he's trusted the teachings to them because he knows they accept it, and they accept the responsibility that comes with it in terms of actualizing the teachings and then leading all sentient beings to do the same. So again, coming back to this responsibility to our spiritual mentors of ending our suffering and helping all sentient beings do the same. So, and how joyful it is when we recognize deeply in ourselves and others the potential that we have to do that. And right now we have such conducive circumstances to do so from the many teachers who are guiding us with the gift of the Dharma. So may we do that.